Hi, and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we'll be continuing with creating our prop sword model. We will be creating an accurate low-res model that is perfect for object tracking sword replacements or adding some VFX to some footage with the sword being used, which I'll make some footage at the end of these tutorials for you to try this. But also we can create it for use as a game asset. So basically in this tutorial I'm going to make it as a game asset, but it's going to be accurate enough so we can use it for our VFX shot as well. So I've got Maya open now, and this is what I use for pretty much all my 3D work. You can, like I said, you can use any 3D software to follow along. All the sort of concept is exactly the same. We're going to be modeling around the scan, and most of it's going to be exactly the same in any software. It's just going to be different tools. The reason why I use Maya is because it's just what most VFX houses use, and all their pipelines are basically built around it. So I'm just going to go to File and Import. I'm going to navigate to my export, which was my sword, prop sword, OBJ, because it's 114 megabyte. So I'm just going to import that, and it might take a little time, depending on how fast your computer is. It shouldn't take too long, it's not that big. Cool. So we can see we've got our sword model here. We can go up to shading, select hardware texturing, and now it should load in the textures. And we can turn the grid off as well, just so we can see it. And you can see we've got some pretty good textures on here, but we can also go to renderer, viewport, and we can change our maximum texture resolution. We just max it out, and we can regenerate all tiles and reload all textures. And now that we can see, we've got the full resolution texture. And you can see it's pretty good. It's just the mesh is too high res, and we obviously need to fix some of this stuff in textures. So our first thing that we need to do is orientate and scale. So if you did the previous tutorial of the set build, we're going to do something very similar. I'm actually going to start with a cube. Yeah, I'm going to start with a cube because it's just easier. And I'm just going to go to my channel box layer. I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 1, because what I need to do, I need to keep this position, but this position is not great to do any modeling in. We want it at the origin. So I'm going to use this cube to give myself 2 orientations. So I'm just going to move this cube, and I'm just going to roughly make that sword shape. And I'm just going to double check this is on object. So I've double clicked on my rotation here to open my tool settings, and I've got it on object. So now I'm just going to align this cube, or now rectangle, to the blade. And the more accurate we get this, the easier our sort of modeling will be, because we can get it close to the origin. So I'm just going to orientate this, just try and get it as close as possible. So I'm just doing slight adjustments to rotate around, because I can assume this is probably fairly flat. Or I can pick the other side. The other side looks pretty flat. It's entirely up to you what side you want to do. I just want to try and get this as flat on as possible so I can get this orientation. I'm just going to scale that down there. Cool, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I've got this position of the sword. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to grab my sword, I'm going to middle mouse and drop it under my cube. Then I'm going to press S So S keyframes all. So now I'm going to go to the second keyframe. And I am going to select all my translations and rotates and press 0. Then I press S. And now that's keyed that in the zeroed out position and the original position. And the reason why we need the original position is so that we can reproject our textures back on. And this is going to make us a lot easier for us to make a very quick sort of game asset. So I'm just going to go to the measurements. So I know the measurements for the sort of width of this section, as you can see here. So on my vernier or caliper, I've got is 70.6 millimeters. So I'm just going to create another cube just as reference, and I'm going to go to my attribute editor, and I'm going to change this. So this is in centimeters, so it will be 7.06. I'm going to do that for all. So that's just a square size of the width. So it just makes it easier for me to now just go scale this up. And because that's at the origin, and our original cube, which is now a rectangle, is its origin, we don't need to move it. We can just scale it up until they're roughly at the top. And now we're at the same scale. So I'm going to press S again now, and that's keyframed. So now if I skip between the frames, I've now got my original scale from the scanning software, then my modeling scale. So now I can delete this cube. And what I can do is press Shift P, and now that's removed the sword mesh out of here, and it's adopted all the translations, rotations, and scale. And I could just hide my cube. I'm gonna call this position ref, just so I know that's for the position. And now I've got my sword at the correct scale at the origin, and I'm just ready to start modeling. So the first thing that I'm going to do is going to go select my sword, prop sword, and then go to my layers, and I'm going to click this little sheet of paper with the, or just the square with the sort of bluish circle. I'm going to select that. It's going to make a layer, and it's going to add it. So I can press V for visibility, and it disappears. But what I want to do, I want to change this to R for reference. So now I can't select it, and that's there forever until I change that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with modeling. What should we start with? Let's start with the blade, because once we've done the blade, we can then move on to the sort of shackles and the bolts. Then finally, the hilt, or this is probably called something very specific. Then we'll do the handle. Cool. So I'm going to start with the blade. Just going to turn that off. I'm going to start with a cube. I'm just going to scale it up. Like I said, this is not going to be the most complex modeling tutorial, because we're going to be making this as a game asset. But it's going to be good enough for all our tracking needs as well. And it's up to you. You can take this as far as you want. But yeah, I'm just going to make it so it's just a game asset for now. But then we can use it for sort of object tracking later. So what I did then was, you can either right click or hold right click and use your sort of spiderweb diagram. And you can go to face and you can select in here. Or you can go to your modeling toolkit and select face. I kind of prefer to use these because when you're working on quite high res models, the response on selecting these is actually a little bit faster. So I'm just gonna pull this all the way to that edge, pull it up, and And I need to pick whatever side. I'm going to pick this side as my flat side. And I'm going to do the same for that side, this face here. I'm going to pull this all the way down. Press F to center onto it. Then I'm just going to pull this out. Then I've got it down to there. So now I'm going to select my edge. I'm going to pull this one in until it meets. Then I'm going to do this one down here as well. I'm just going to select my face. Let's select that bottom one and sort of bring it roughly. Just going to bring it up here because it sort of waves up and down, so we're going to have to add some extra ones in. So I'm going to select my edge. And I'm actually going to match this one first. Now what I can do, I need to add some extra, like you could probably almost get away with not doing this, but because there's going to be barely any geo on this blade anyway, we could probably add a little bit extra, just to add that, just enough of that difference into it. So I'm just going to select my object and then go to my multi-cut. And you can see it sort of come as a lean. So if you hold Control and left click, it makes an edge loop. So once I've made that edge loop, we can select our vertices, press R, then just scale it in one direction. And this is why it's really nice when you're working in the origin and everything's orientated correctly. Because you can do that, you can use your scale tools to realign things. And it doesn't go at a funny angle. But if you're at a funny angle, you can't really do that because then it's going to start scaling things oddly. So I'm just going to make sure you got both sides when you do that. I'm just going to get this basic blocking shape out. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to add some more edges. Just selecting the vertices and pull it down. Like I say, if you want to keep it, you can probably keep this extremely low poly if you want. If you just want it for a game asset, you could probably skip this, but I think it's going to be low enough, and it should be okay. And let's just get one more here. But to kind of I want to keep that sort of curve. So I'd say you don't have to do that, but it's entirely up to you. So we've kind of got that edge sorted. So now if we hide our scan, we can see we've got a very rough shape. So you could probably get rid of half these edges if you don't want them, but for this I'm really not too bothered. So I'm just going to select my faces. I'm only going to select the faces where the blade thins out. So now if I press Ctrl E to extrude, I'm just going to select this blue one, and that's going to extrude on the local translate. So you can do thickness, local translate. I think which one's the best one for this, probably just local translate. It's probably good enough because we're still going to have to adjust it anyway. And we're just going to scale it out till it's sort of roughly there. So now I'm just going to go to my modeling toolkit, select my edges. And now if I press W, translate, I can now just pull this blade in. Obviously you don't want it too far, you want to make sure you're not going too far over. So now we've sort of got it roughly in that place. Let's select our vertices and let's do some fine adjustments. Cool, make sure you're in the right orientation. So definitely got that. Doesn't need to be, obviously that comes to a point, but we haven't got we want to make sure this is rounded, so we can do that afterwards. Let's possibly bring out, let's just try and get this aligned as best as possible. I'm just going to go around and sort of adjust the vertices and sort of in the translations and sort of get it nicely lined up. So it can be a little bit fiddly, but the closer you get it, the better it's going to be. Like I said, we're only doing this as per se we're doing a game asset, so we don't need to get every single like crease and dent in it. We just want to get the shape as close as possible. But like I say, you can do this to any level. I'm just going to try and hit two things. I'm just trying to hit like two sort of jobs for one tutorial here, sort of, instead of doing one for VFX then one for games. We can do one basically for both at the same time, covering the same, it's sort of the same thing. But if you're kind of, if you're doing a sort of an object track, when there's like a prop sword, there's probably quite a high chance that you're going to be replacing the sword with something different anyway, or a better version of this sword. So you're still going to need to have a low res one for like the animation and the sort of object tracking and all that, because they're going to animate. If this was done for VFX, they would animate with the low res one. Then basically they would just parent the final asset on there. But we can, instead of just doing it as a model, low res, we can try and get this into a game engine as well and get it looking nice in there. So just going around, adjusting all the vertices so it sort of fits. See, this is going to be thinner in some parts. Cool, so we got a pretty good shape. Got that fairly well blocked out. So now our next sort of challenge is to sort of get this curve. So if we hide our scan, we can see what we've got now. And let's add a small curve. I was trying to think if it's really worth it or not. Let's have a look. So let's go to our display, heads up display, and turn on our poly count so we can see how many polys that we're using. So we're at 54, and we could probably leave it as that, to be honest. Do I want to do that? Let's see what. Let's just add an edge loop there. Do I want to do it that way? You see how when we start adding edge loops in, our poly count drastically goes up. So I can't actually see that now. So we've roughly got that, and so it's going to be less if we add it that way around. Obviously we don't have to do this. Cool. So probably didn't really need to do that, but we've done it anyway. So it's up to you, really. This is going to be quite a low poly, and if it's too high, we can reduce it and remove it afterwards. So I'm pretty much done with the blade. Let's now move on to these sort of brackets. So, in fact, let's just have a look at this top edge. Sorry, quickly. So we're quite up high. Just make sure that our geo is nicely over the top, because the tighter we get it, the better our projections will be, and the less we all have to fix it. Cool. So let's now move on to these sort of brackets. So if you haven't saved it already, save it. And we'll just go to our poly modeling and we'll make a cube again. In fact, let's rename this to blade first. Let's call it sword blade geo. And we can just scale this up so we can see it. And we want to be making these brackets, so we can kind of figure out how these brackets go, but we can't really see how they sort of loop, but we can do a best guess. Actually just match it at the top, because it's probably going to be easier to do it that way. Select my face. And these are probably very straight, these are. I think they're door hinges. They'll be used for a student film. Cool. So now I'm going to use my multi-cut again. I'm just going to multi-cut where these loops are. And we can just start selecting our faces and press Ctrl E and extrude up. But I kind of want to, let's undo that. If I do this by hand, it's probably not going to be too great. So I'm going to select a cylinder. I'm just going to pull this down. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. I'm just going to scale this to roughly the same size as one of these. Sort of little loop parts. And I just want to kind of get this shape as close as possible. And I think that's pretty close actually straight away. Maybe even a slight scale down. Cool. So what we can do is let's hide our scan, and we could have done this as a tube if we wanted to. But what I'm going to do is go to my modeling, my attribute editor, polycylinder, add subdivision caps, and I'm just going to kind of keep adding. Well, I think maybe 3 is probably. Maybe 4. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it as that. So you can use a tube, but I'm just going to use a cylinder because I've already got the right scale. I'm just selecting all these edges now, and I'm going to go to my layer editor. I'm just going to. So I can see that these go all the way around. So I'm going to match this back one because I've got more detail. And you could probably lower the resolution. This is probably quite high actually, but don't worry too much. Unless you're planning on using this for a game and you're really intent on making it as low as possible, maybe then you might want to delete some of my excess geo, but we're going to aim to get this as low as possible. So I'm going to use this side as more of a reference. I'm just going to scale it. Scale my. Let's do both of them at the same time. What we can do, we can hold Shift and right click and use transform component. So now this will sort of scale it on the inside without, because if you just scale, so if I select those edges, so if I just scaled those edges, they're going to suck in. But if I hold shift and right click and use transform component, I can scale it in the axis of the normals, which is really useful. So we've now just done a very small adjustment on that. So I'm quite happy with that size. So all we need to do now is figure out where this ends, or if you want to keep it as a solid loop, you can, but I feel like we should probably just get rid of that. That one. I'm just going to right click and hold my edge. Just to make sure I can see it, I'm actually going to select them both. And this is why it's so good to work at the origin, because now you can just keep use all your tools at the sort of manipulate the transform and rotates at their default sort of orientations. Oh, that's. So we've sort of adjusted that. Now let's adjust this one. Let's just adjust any funky parts. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is going to hold my edge. I'm going to select this edge and then go to Modeling Toolkit and select Bridge wherever it's gone. And I'm going to do the same for. I'm just going to double click on all this and I think actually I need to do those first. I'm going to press G to repeat command. Then I'm going to double click all that and then deselect these edges. If I press G again, it should now bridge all those edges, apart from this one here. Cool, so now we've got this sort of one single loop. And what we want to do is, if we press W, we can control D. And I imagine they're probably very similar all the way throughout, so I'm just going to duplicate these and try to get them to fit. Just going to duplicate it again. Select the vertices. I'm just going to bring that all the way to the end. You can sort of see it slightly. It's hard to tell if it's sort of. You can sort of see this. This doesn't look kind of right here. It's kind of the mesh might be a bit gone a bit funny, but don't worry too much about that. So, if we actually look at these, we can see we've got, if we select all our parts that we've just done, we can see that it's similar on this side, but if we look left, actually, it's actually different. So before we attach these, I'm actually going to select them all, Control D and duplicate, and Control G to put them all together. Then you go to Modify, Center Pivot. I'm just going to bring these down here. And I'm just going to leave those for now because I'm going to use that to build this part. It's just I'm going to use them as a base template. So I'm going to go back to here. And I'm going to select all these parts. Ooh. And I go to Mesh, Combine. So now I've combined all these. So actually I probably could have just done this. Probably could have just selected that edge, shift right click, fill hole, then select face and that face. Then we can just bridge. And now let's bridge that to there. And we can do that for all the other ones. So hold shift and right click and fill hole. And let's do all the other ones first. Double click, hold shift, right click and fill hole. So now if we select face, select this face and that one, select bridge, select this one and that one and press G. So now if we look at that, we've got our sort of base sort of model done. So let's now go to our attribute editor, our channel box, and have a look, see if there's anything funky going on. And probably these are maybe they're not slightly they probably are slightly bent, to be honest. So let's select all these edges, vertices, sorry. Let's push this in. It seems kind of wonky. So I'm just going to try and match this side. Then deselect that and match that side. I'm just going to do the same here. Cool, and that's pretty nicely lined up. So we are already on. God, I was going to say that's a lot of faces, but that's actually not us. So we're on 500 sort of faces already. It's quite a lot for a sword. We could probably bring this down quite a lot, to be honest. So I'm probably not going to do those holes. We can do the bolts and stuff. But let's finish off doing this. So now let's do this side. Let's adjust this. Plane. So this could be a little bit too much detail on the hoops for sure. And we can probably, if we want to, we can reduce it. We can just select and delete some of these edge loops. And we'll have a look afterwards. Once we've done all of these, we'll decide that. So I'm just going to go to my modeling toolkit. And let's get this. Ooh. Where's that gone? So actually I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to select my edges that I added because they're in different places. Almost, but I'm going to hold Control and delete that. Then I just want to reposition because it's easier to reposition it when there's no subdivisions because then you only have to worry about two ends. So I'm going to select my vertices. I'm just going to match these sort of edges. Cool, so that's pretty good. So now we're just going to go to our multi-cut and do the same again. I'm going to select where these edges are. And because we could have duplicated this, let's think. Do you know what? Actually, let's do that. Let's just duplicate that. Let's Control D on that. W. And what we can do, we can just see which ones fit straight away quite nicely. Let's rotate it around. So it saves a lot of time reusing models that you've already done. Sometimes you can just get too carried away on wanting to model everything, but see, we can pretty much, we've almost got that done already. So all we need to do now is actually just hide that, and we can select all these faces and deselect those, just delete that. If we double click on the edge, hold shift and right click, fill hole. Let's make sure this is on our model nicely. Let's just pick one edge to line up to. So I'm just going to select my modeling, my vertices. This could be slightly buckled. That's sort of sorted that. And now let's just adjust these along till they're roughly in the correct place. We can select our face on the edge, Control E, just drag it out until it meets the edge. Cool, so if we select our, hide our sort of scan, we can see our brackets, and then we can see that maybe we need to actually pull this out a bit, so that's actually touching. It's probably cool. So I'm undecided whether to do these holes because we can start drifting away from an actual game asset. So we're at 550 polygons, and we could probably reduce this quite a lot. So should we do it? Let's have a look on this one. So I'm just gonna, what I'm gonna do is select start this end and delete every other edge. Control delete and see where that gets us. So yeah, let's do that. Let's just select every other edge. Because if you want to make this a high res sort of model, you can, but I kind of just want to make this more of a game asset. But we can still use this for object tracking and VFX stuff. So I just didn't want to sort of, because I mostly make VFX sort of stuff, so I tend to not too worry too much about poly counts, but I think even in this case it probably doesn't matter because this is still quite relatively low. But if you're doing it for a game, I guess every sort of poly counts, so you've got to try and trim it off wherever you can. And now when we look at that, we've drastically, what's like 200 odd polys less now. Cool. So let's call this bracket 1 geo. Just gonna cross C that. Cool. So we've done those. And what we can do is just Control D, move them across. Do we want to, because we're gonna have to UV those. We can either just make it all now and UV it all at the end, or then UV it and duplicate it. It's entirely up to you. If we just model all of it now, that means we're going to do like repetitive UVing. Let's not. Let's do that at the end. Anything that's a duplicate, where we UV, then we'll duplicate. Because we don't want to model all these bolts, then UV them 8 times, when we can just model it once, UV it once, then just duplicate it 7 other times. So I'm just going to start doing one of these bolts now. So these will probably be quite easy. I'm just going to select a cylinder. I'm just going to rotate 90 degrees. Just going to pull this out. In fact, I'm just going to center it. Then I go to my Tribute editor and bring my subdivision axis all the way down. Until it's got the correct amount of sides. That's nicely aligned. And like I said, you can decide to model this like amazingly good for VFX if you want. I'm just trying to sort of hit 2 birds with 1 stone with the sort of scan stuff. So what I'll do is, I can't see that, so I'm just gonna Control 1 and isolate it. So now we've done that, what I can do is go to my face, select all the back ones and delete, because probably don't need them. Then I can just hide it in there. So select this edge, scale it out so I can see it. I'm just going to pull it forward a bit. That's going to give us the sort of beveled edge, but like I say, this is just for a game, so game assets, so don't worry too much. And if we just hide our scan and see how that looks. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. So what we can do actually is, even though we're doing it as a game, we can still sort of fix this topology. So just going to select these faces, delete them. I'm going to select this edge and that edge, modeling, and I'm just going to go bridge and G, so bridge. So now I've got quads. It's not a big deal, but it's nice to know that I've got quads now. And we can leave that as it is, because we're going to duplicate it again. And we're just going to call this bolt 1. So then we're going to duplicate that across. So now then our final thing is, well, not a final thing, the other thing is to do this sort of hilt. I think it's called a hilt thing, is it? And then do the handle. So this part is probably going to be the most, it's not going to be difficult, but it's probably going to be the most complex part, because we're going to have to add this in. There's only so much you can hide in a low poly, but I don't think you could hide a hole. unless you put an opacity map on there, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to try and model it. So I'm just going to make a polycube again. I'm just going to scale it up roughly to the similar sort of size. Just going to scale it in. Just going to try and position this so it's as level on the sort of as possible. Cool. So let's just select these edges, pull that down. Let's just match some of this. Cool. So obviously now we've just got a big square. We need to make these rounded edges. So what we can do, we could either, let's just hide it for now and see what the shape is. So we do need to sort of build this shape. So what we can do first is let's unhide that. Let's just hide it and let's see what we. So I want to be able to model around here. So let's hide that. I'm just going to make a cut down the middle and on the sides. I'm just going to bring these edges in. Just so it's just a bit easier to see. It's a bit awkward when it's just a big square. Now we can see much clearer where we need to sort of build stuff. Let's add another edge there, another edge there. At the moment, I'm just going to block it out more with just rough geometry first, then rather than actually model it. Because blocking it out, because whenever you actually model stuff and something, you'll end up blocking it out first anyway. Because it's just a method that makes your modeling so much more faster. Basically, blocking it all out is it's good to be able to see a rough final product before you actually start going into sort of the really fine detail of it. Obviously we're adding quite a few extra polys to this. So if I actually see what I can see in X-ray. Let's make an edge loop there. So let's have a think how we ideally want to do this the cleanest way. So I'm just gonna roughly block it out with the cut tool. I'm just trying to think what the best approach is for this. So I think if I do that, I think what I'm going to do is, so I can do something a little bit different. So I'm going to actually just use this as a blocking piece of geo, because I want this quite nice. I want to be able to use this. So I'm actually going to add some more. I'm going to add some more divisions, because this is not going to be the sort of final model. I'm actually just going to use this for reference, because I could use the scan, but the scan isn't that great. What I can do, I can model trace around the scan with this nice geo, although the topology is awful. Like I say, this is just a sort of, imagine it as a template and nothing more. Just so, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this nice so it's fitting around the edge. Then I'm going to make this geometry live and then quad draw around the nice geometry, but in X-ray mode, so I can see the actual scan as well. It's just so when I use the quad draw, it's also not picking up on all the little tiny bumps and imperfections of the scan. So although like the scan's really nice and it's got loads of detail, when you're using quad draw over maybe something like this, it's probably going to pick up some things that you don't want. So this way, I kind of get to be able to trace with the quad draw, but do it onto a mesh that I kind of like. So I'm actually going to do this as well. Because I'm right on the edge, I'm just going to Control E. This might look crazy what I'm doing right now, but cool. So it's done. No, it's not really, but let's get this a decent thickness so we can see. Cool. So obviously we've made this sort of rough mesh. So now I'm going to go up to this magnet here. I'm going to select it. Now it says PQ4 is live. I'm going to select quad draw. Then go to shading and X-ray. So now what I can do, I can use I can use quad draw. So where shall I start? Let's start from this most complicated part, because we need to sort of make this sort of edge loop go round. So we actually need to point there, and you can see that I'm actually tracing the actual mesh, but I'm drawing onto my geometry. I'm not drawing onto this mesh. I'm drawing onto that rough mesh that I've literally just made. And the reason why I've done this is because if I was trying to quad draw onto this mesh now, it would be sort of trying to wrap around this edge, it would be snapping onto bits there. it would kind of be a bit nasty. So I'm just going to go around. I'm going to try and make this as even as possible. Even though I'm probably just going to quad draw the whole thing. I could probably use symmetry, but then I'm still going to have to adjust it, and it's such a small thing anyway, so it won't be that difficult to quad draw. So let's imagine that's the center. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 to the edge. So 4. So 1, 2, 3. So let's move these down a bit. It's just to make the mesh. Sorry, is Shift and left click. I'm not sure if I said that or not. And you can see if I was actually quad drawing onto the mesh, I'd be having some quite big problems here. It'd be going to all the places that I don't really want it to and being a bit of a pain. So doing it this way has allowed me to keep it all nice and clean. So I can do that. And I need to continue this round, so I actually need to make an edge loop. And I can now continue this round. And this part is probably going to be the highest poly, but so you don't have to do it. You can just do it as a big plain block if you want, but I kind of want to get this nice. And the other thing about doing onto this is now, because if I was doing it onto the scan, I'd be making geometry onto the handle. This means now I can draw practically through the handle, making it exactly how I sort of want. Let's make a little loop there, because it sort of bounces up, but we don't need it super detailed. And let's do to this side as well. So I'm going to do quite a few of these sort of photogrammetry tutorials, just like different methods for different sort of applications. So we've done the sort of set scan one, where we've scanned and modeled a set, and now we'll just do this prop one. And we've also done the one for making realistic assets with the bread, and that's with a different setup. That's with a more of a turntable setup. Say maybe not everyone has that, and they just have a camera. So I just wanted to make it available pretty much for anyone, basically. Nope. So that's behind there, so that could almost be doing anything, to be honest. So I know this is not looking let's turn our X-ray off and see what's actually going on. Actually, I can just have a look. So it sort of actually dips down. So how can we do that? So it kind of goes down like this, actually. We can't see it on this side, but we can probably edit it when it comes into the other side. Obviously we got tons of reference images from the scan. So it kind of goes down like that. So let's turn our X-ray back on. See if we can finish. Let's tidy up down here. So we can also hold shift to relax that. Probably don't want to do it too much yet because we haven't really got that much detail. But we can move these vertices around to sort of tidy it up and give us a nicer sort of edge flow. So this is only going to be used for either object tracking or as a game asset, so go into as much detail as you feel you need to. So I'm going to turn quad draw off. I'm going to turn make live off. Let's go to object mode. And I don't really want to do that again, so I can just actually Control D. And let's just rotate it around. Or go to Y-axis, press minus before the Y, and flip it upside down. And it should. I imagine it probably fits quite nicely because it's probably just straight out of like a universal cast. It's not a from a real sword. It's just from like a prop sword. Well, from like an imitation sword. So cool. So now we've done that. We can select both our poly surfaces. Go mesh. Combine. Now let's go back to our modeling toolkit and quad draw, and now we can finish modeling this. So we can start to reduce some of the polys by adding loops and nodes in. So I'm just going to go around and make sure that this is all fairly tight to it. Made it a little bit too thin. It's quite hard to select the vertices sometimes. Just make sure it's as close as possible. So I'm just going to go for quad draw. And I'm just going to go through and Just gonna remove sections that I don't really need and reduce it just by adding extra edge loops and some nodes. Like this, it's a static object, so I know you still want good topology and stuff, but sometimes it's. What have we done here? Let's actually start from this side and work away. I'm just going to use my relax tool to sort of relax it all. I'm just going to go through. And you know what? Let's just go to the halfway point. And I'll probably duplicate that a little bit too soon. Because then we're still going to have to do the same to the other side, so I think I got a bit ahead of myself. I'm going to go to my faces, just delete that. Then Control D, go to my Y-axis, minus in the Y. So I'm just going to rotate this around so it sort of roughly fits. We're still going to have to adjust it, but it means now I don't have to add those edge loops and mess around with that. So I'm going to select both our geo. Oh. No, can't select it. Oh. Go select those, go mesh, combine. I'm just going to right click, hold vertex, and I'm just going to select the vertices. I'm going to go to edit mesh and merge to center. I'm going to select them all and press G to repeat command. I'm just going to do that to all of them, just so I know they're definitely merged. Now I can go to my modeling toolkit, quad draw. Let's hold shift and left click and just relax it, just so it sort of works nicer. Got some nice looking topology. Then we can go around and just sort of fine tune our edges. Like I say, you could probably just go around and box model this if you want, but this is kind of a way that I'll do it. For me, it's a bit faster doing it this way. It's taking me a little bit longer because I'm kind of also talking through how to do it. I want to try and keep it so no one's. I don't want to go too fast and then people having to stop start. I want to sort of go at a pace that I would like to watch it if I was learning something. So I'm just going to go around all these edges. I think the relax may have shrunken it in a bit. The relax doesn't usually pull the edges, but it seems to. Or maybe I was just not pulling it further out enough. So I'm just going to pull this all the way to the edge. I know it seems like I've done this in a weird way because I'm not actually doing it onto the scan, I'm doing it onto a flat piece of geo. But to me, this is the cleanest way to do it. Because then I'm not adding sort of lumps and bumps in from the bad, because the scan's not perfect, especially in some of these smaller places. It's actually a little bit rough, but this way it allows me to sort of get a nice clean model and still trace around it with quad draw. So it's a nice little technique that'll save you time and not having to clean it up afterwards. Just going to go around and make sure these are all We've made this quite high poly compared to most of the other stuff. But like I say, you can do this as much detail as you want. Cool. And if I go out of quad draw, turn, I didn't actually have that on make live. Whoops. So what I need to do now is actually select all these vertices and scale it like that. That was probably why it looked a bit funny, because I didn't actually have my model live, which is a bit stupid. So let's select that again and make that live. Quad draw. Sorry, just double check this, that it's not done anything crazy. It seems fine. So let's turn that off. Let's go back to our, let's turn off X-ray, and we can hide this. And now you can see we've got this quite nicely traced out. So if we just have a look and see what. It's up to you whether if you want to reduce the polys on this even more. You probably can take it down quite a bit. I'm just going to leave as it is. I'm going to select everything, all the faces, Control E. And obviously it's gone. I can either do it that way or that way, but then I'll have to reverse the... I'll do that anyway, just to show you how to do it. So it's going to extrude that way, but I want it to extrude that way. And I can either just extrude it this way and just slide it, or... because this might be something that you'll come across anyway, so I may as well show you how to fix this. Because no doubt at some point you'll end up with black polygons. So what's happened here is you've flipped the normals. So if we now go to our mesh tool, to mesh display and reverse, our normals are now flipped back. Let's just go to our object mode. Let's just rotate this so it fits nicely. And I'm just going to make, actually put the middle. So I'm just going to scale that slightly. Then I'm just going to scale both of these ever so slightly, so it's not just a straight edge, there's a little bit of a curve. And I'll do the same for the inside bits as well, why not? What I'll do, I'll hold shift and use my transform component tool. And that'll do that job nicely. Just do the same again. Cool. So let's go to our channel box, and now we can see we've got, oh, we have need, let's do this bit down here as well. So shift and transform component. And let's just do the other side. So double click on that, shift and transform component. We'll just bring that in. And we do the same again to the center, but the opposite way. You can see how that gives us a little bit of a nice curve on it. Did we do that on the other bit? Cool. So now we've got this nice shape. Obviously there's a a lump here, but let's bring our sword all the way in. Let's have a look at that actually. We don't want to add too much detail to it, so let's hide that. Let's push this bit of the sword back. Cool. So now we've got this sort of sword and hilt. We've done our sword, and well, we've done one bolt, 2 brackets, and this sort of hilt part. So now we need to do this handle. So there's a ton of detail in this handle, and if you're modeling it for VFX, you might end up having to model all these sort of twisted bits of lace. But in this case, we won't. We will just be, for this part, I was trying to think, because we've got multiple metallic things here. We've got like a metal blade, sort of a metal bronzy hilt, wood, lace, metal here and metal here. So let's I'm trying to think the best way to do this, because ideally if we want to do this for VFX, we would do this all separate, so we have separate bits of wood and string and separate metal, so we can split it up into separate textures. But for this, let's do it all as, let's start from here, then we'll work all the way down basically. Let's see how it goes. So I'm just going to start with a cylinder. I'm probably going to pause and think sometimes, because I'm just doing this as I go along. I've not done this. I've not made this model. I've not practiced. This is the first time remodeling it, so I'm just figuring out the best way as I go along. So I'm going to bring this all the way down. Just going to scale this roughly to the end. I'm going to try and get this shape from the center. Because we can, when we do textures, we can bake these texture maps onto it, and we can get some normals from this. And some displacement if you want that. But for the meantime, we're just going to keep it basic. So where I've scaled it and matched it, I'm actually going to go to my modeling toolkit. I'm going to multi-cut, create an edge loop there, because that's a bit that I like. Then I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to raise this up and try and make that fit. Now I'm going to do the same for here. Obviously this lace is kind of tied up at the end, it's not. Obviously you probably wouldn't do this to your actual, it's supposed to be like a post-apocalyptic sort of sword sort of thing for a little student film. So it's got a mix of everything in it. So I'm just going to make it very basic. I'm going to make a edge loop there, an edge loop here. I'm just going to try and match it Actually, gonna slightly adjust this as well. So obviously that sort of ends there, but there's quite a lot of depth in this sort of lace. Well, let's actually continue to. So where did we get up to? Bolts. What's this P cube? That's our reference, so we can actually delete that. And there's our hilt. So if I just go edit, delete by type history. Now that gets rid of all the stuff. We'll just call this sword. What do you call it? Hilt. And we'll name it all properly. Geo. Sword. Handle. Then what we'll do, we'll make that as a separate piece. We could probably keep it the same. But I'm thinking for retexturing and maybe fixing textures it might be a bit easier. So I'm just going to duplicate my sword handle geo. Just push it up. Use multi-cut. I'll select all the faces. Delete them. I've also just realized if we select our sword handle and select our sword handle, we've got all these polys in here and we don't need these, so what we can actually do is select our faces, make sure we've not selected anything else. Let's delete those. Just make sure we've not got anything else selected. Delete. And then let's see where. Oh, cancel. Control 1. And let's select the edge, Control E. I'm just going to scale that in like that. So it's hidden in there, but I've got no geometry on the end. And I'm going to do the same here. Control E. Because this is going to make it easier for UVing as well. So I can hide. Let's just hide that for now. Just call this sword handle tip. Let's center the pivot. It's basically done already. It's just slightly different. And if we just isolate that, obviously we can't do the same to the end, even though it's got the hole in the end, but I don't want that hole. We can fix that afterwards. So if I'm going to select these faces and delete them. Go to the edge, go to Control E, scale it in. Then I can select these edges and bridge. And once I've done one, just do all the others. Press G, and that's bridged. And I'm just going to Control E on this side, scale it in, and I'm just going to press scale it in and make it go that way, so it's overlapping. Hopefully overlapping the geo. Let's push this back So if we now hide sword, we can see we've got some areas that we probably want to clean up because we can't really see it anyway. But we want to make sure that it's kind of nice and there's not any weird stuff going on. So I'm just going to pull these in until they're sort of touching the hilt. Also making sure that I don't see any of the inside. Cool, so I would probably say that we finished modeling it. There's a few things that we can do to sort of, if we look at this, we can see that we've got some nice sort of edging here, but on our handle it's kind of, it looks very faceted, so you can see all the edges. We can select all the faces. Then we can go to mesh display and soften edge. So now that's given us a smooth edge. And we can do the same for this. Press G to repeat. So now those got soft edge normals. And what we can do, we'll need to change these to hard. So now you've got, obviously that's quite low res there, but it's not so obvious. Cool, so we finished modeling it. Our next step would be now to UV it. So I'll probably do that in a separate tutorial. Let me just think if I've missed anything. Because we're not going to model all these, we're going to UV them, then duplicate them. Let me just think, have we missed anything? No, I think we're pretty much done. So what we'll do just before we finish this up, we'll just tidy up our scene. So what have we got here? If we just select everything, if we'd edit, delete by type history, let's delete this group. Let's group this, and we'll call this prop sword group. Sword blade. Cool. So yeah, we're pretty much done now. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.